Hi there and welcome to the sew along video. So to complete this garment you're going to need to have access to an overlocker and also a plain stitch sewing machine. So to start with, this garment is a knit garment, so set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric and make sure the stitch width is set to 6mm or 1/4 inch. With our plain sewing machine, it's a good idea to lengthen your stitch length slightly from normal and make sure there's a ball needle in it. The ball needle will make sure that we don't cut our threads when we sew. So when you're ready, let's get started on the collar pieces. So our collar pieces are rectangles, and if you're following the contrast example, you will have one in your main fabric and one in your lining fabric. So let's start by placing these pieces right sides together, and we're going to overlock through the shorter ends. Now you'll notice the lining piece is going to be narrower than the main piece. So when we sew, we're not going to cut any fabric off with our blade, we're just going to sew directly on the edge of our garment seam allowance. So when you've done this end, match the other end, right sides together and overlock. So when we look at this pattern piece at the end, you'll see a notch here. Now that notch shows us the fold position. So fold that like so, and what you will find is when you fold that, the notch on the lining will match to a notch on the main piece like that. So go ahead and match those notches into place. Now these notches are actually just directly opposite positions that we need for the shoulder, but I've left them in here just so you can make sure you get this in a very perfect position. So go ahead and match those into position, and that will work all your way through to the other side, so it's directly opposite it like so. Right. So when you have those all held into position, what we're going to do is overlock this edge into place, making sure that that notch on the fold is right at the edge. And make sure you take out your pins as you go. If you run over your pins, you will break your overlocking needles. Right, so now what you can do is turn this through and pop it somewhere safe, and we'll move on. Also, if you want to, you can give that a press, making sure your press position, you'll see a notch on the corner, so that can be pressed down nice and tidily like that. So now let's work on our front pieces. So you're going to need the right front, which is in the main fabric, and then the short piece that's the left front in your contrast fabric. So when you're ready, place those right sides together, and you'll know it's in the correct place because just down from the upper edge you'll find a notch, and that will match to the notch on the piece here. So what we're going to do is just overlock through that long seam. So this pattern is designed to have buttons set in it, and what you'll find just in from the seam here is there are some notches that run along the top. So we're looking for this notch here that's closest to the seam and the next one. What this notch here does is tell us where to fold the fabric, and then when that folds back, the notch will match to the edge of the seam we've just sewn. So what we want to do is end up with a fold or a tuck like that. So tuck that into position at the top edge, and you'll find exactly the same thing at the bottom edge. You'll have a notch here, a notch here. What we want to do is fold that back like so. And if you feel more comfortable, you could run a line of tack stitches there to hold that into place. So there we have it, right sides up. What I'd like you to do now is go ahead and press this fold into position. So what we want to do is have a nice crisp edge through that line there. So what you will see is having ironed this into position will give us a nice crisp line. Oh, and don't forget to test your iron before you use it with a press cloth. Just in case you end up with shine, and it's a good idea to try and press on the reverse of any sweatshirting fabrics too, so you will eliminate any shine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew a button wrap into place, and the position we need to sew it is directly on top of this line of overlocking here. So you might find it easier to do this from the back of the garment, from this side. I'm going to stitch mine from the front, and I'm just going to feel the position of the edge of the overlocking and just put my presser foot on the edge of that. But certainly if you find it easier, just run a line of stitching through the middle of your overlocker. Now remember to make sure you have a ball needle in your machine and lengthen your stitch length from normal. So as you can tell, now we've created an area for our buttons to go on. So there's our button placket. Next, you'll need to take your front yoke pieces, and we're going to attach them to the upper area of the front. So take your piece and turn it so right sides are together, and we're going to match this long extended piece to both sides. So the curve side is the armhole and the extended side is the neckline. Now they won't go the whole way. So when you put them into place, this is what they're going to look like. So when we overlock them in, you'll see a notch there, and that notch will match to the notch here, and it will stop short of the center notch. And on the other side, you'll find the notch will match to a notch on the contrast piece, and the same thing. It won't match to the center, it will come short of the center. So when you're ready, just overlock those into position. You need to make sure that the armhole edge matches and the notches match. The taper off is deliberate, so what we want to do is just taper and keep stitching, and then come to the other side and match that into position. Now if you find this too difficult, just stop here, turn this around and start from the other armhole. Now remember, if you feel more comfortable, to make sure you press with your iron as you go. So now we're going to work on the pockets. So our pockets look like this. We have 4 of them. We have 2 pairs. So we've cut one like this and one like that. Well, actually we've cut 2 like this and 2 like that. So take one of your pocket pieces and place it so that there is right sides together onto the side seam, like so. The pocket will match at the bottom, and there'll be a notch here that matches up here. There are many different ways to sew in pockets. You choose the one you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to just overlock that together, making sure that the bottom of my pocket matches the bottom of the garment front. Because what's going to happen in a minute is this is going to turn to the inside to create the area for our pocket. Oh, I've missed a teeny bit there. I'll just quickly overlock that again. Sorry about that, too busy talking. Okay, so when you've done the pocket on this side, do the same thing in reverse. So take your pocket, this is the right side, place it so that right sides are together, and we're going to match that to the very bottom of the garment and sew up the side seam. And there's my notch here. So let's do the same thing for our pockets on the back piece. Take your back piece and place it right side up. Then match your pockets into position so that the pockets are right sides together. And I'm going to overlock these from the bottom up because I think it's a little bit easier. Now place your back right side up and take your front and place it right sides down so we have right sides together. We're now going to overlock the shoulders into position. Now we have the body of the garment sewn together at the shoulders, we're going to sew in the sleeve. So here you can see the neck area, and here is our armhole area. Take your sleeve pieces, and we have a pair, which is also known as a mirror. We've cut one this way and we've cut one this way. When we look at the sleeves, we'll have a notch at the center of the top, and that's called the crown notch, and that needs to match to the shoulder on our garment. And then as we come down one of the sides, you'll see 2 notches close together, and the 2 notches show us the position for the back of the sleeve. So it's important that we get the sleeve in correctly to the right side because they're not symmetrical pieces. They haven't been cut on a fold. So making sure you have the right sleeve. So let's just put this together. So here is the back of my garment and here is the front of my garment. So what I need to do is, the double notches are here, so I need to make sure I pick up the sleeve right sides together so that the double notch is on this side. If you don't have a notch, it means it's the sleeve for the other side. So when you have that in the correct way, so right sides together, hold the double notch into position, then match the shoulder seam here to the crown notch. So those are the positions we have to make sure our ease is distributed between, and the beginning and the end of our sewing. So match your underarm point there, and let's start overlocking this together. So sew a couple of stitches just to anchor those into position. That will just free up your hands and give you a little bit of extra room. What we're going to do is make sure that we overlock directly on the raw edges of our fabric, making sure all the fullness is evenly distributed between the edge and our crown notch. Remembering that our crown notch is our shoulder seam. As you go up, you will come across the seam here. Just make sure you overlock over it nice and smoothly. So just open that up and check that that sleeve is sewn in nicely. And when you're happy with that, go ahead and repeat this on the other side of your garment. So what we've done, we're just going to be doing in reverse. Take the sleeve, place it right sides together to your garment. Find the crown notch here and match that to the shoulder seam. And then find the double notches here and match that to the double notches on the body of the garment. Come to the lower sleeve area and fold this so it is right sides together. We're going to sew up the underarm area, matching the notches and making sure the underarm seams sit directly on top of each other, and we're going to make sure that the waist notches sit on top of each other, and we're just going to stop here. So the reason we stopped here is to make sure that we take our pockets and fold them out. Now, depending on how you sewed this, what we need to do is sew down and around the outside of this curve. Now you would have noticed that the notch here shows us the seam allowance for the pocket. So what we're going to do now is go to our plain sewer and re-stitch in the pocket to give us some extra reinforcing. So depending on the way you sewed your pocket in, this method might be appropriate or not. What I'm going to do is start about 2 inches or 5 centimeters directly on the outside edge of my overlocking, and I'm just going to sew a couple of back tack stitches. So what we need to do is follow the line of the side seam all the way down to here, opposite the notch position, and we have to make sure that these pockets are sitting directly on top of each other. So we want to stop directly opposite the notch. When you get to that position, we're going to turn and pivot, and then we're going to sew all the way down parallel to this overlocked edge towards the hem. So what we're looking for is that the pockets are directly on top of each other like that. And then that pocket needs to be folded so that it sits towards the front of our garment. And when you have that in the correct position, what you will see is on the edge there is a notch here, and that notch needs to sit on the notch of the pocket. And it's a good idea now just to run a line of tacking stitches within the seam allowance, so 3 mils, 1/8 of an inch, just to hold those layers into position, because when we sew the band on, we want to make sure that the band's in the correct place. So here is our position here. Now bear in mind this pocket comes all the way down to the top of the band. So this is the back and this is the front. So for the pocket on the other side, what you're looking for is you want to fold the pocket like this. So here is the back and this is the front. We want to make sure that that fold sits directly on the side seam line. And that as we come across, everything is matched up. You'll find a notch here and a notch there. If you're like me and you have 2 completely different fabrics, you might find the stretch is different, so you might just have to work around this. So the pocket on this side will be like that. Okay, so now we're going to work on the cuff area. So turn your garment so that it is right side out. Okay, so you're going to have 2 cuffs that look like this, they're rectangles. What we want to do is take one of them, fold it so that it is right sides together, and we're going to overlock the short edge. Now the short edge is the one that does not have the notch in it. And repeat that on the other piece. And then take that cuff and turn it back on itself. So we have wrong sides together and right sides out. Place one of those cuffs somewhere safe. Take your garment and come to the sleeve area. The seam here on the sleeve, we're going to sew to the seam here on the cuff. So what we're going to do is put our sleeve inside our cuff and match that seam. Directly opposite that, there will be a notch on the garment, and that notch will match the notch you have on the cuff. So find that position and pin that into place. Now we're going to go ahead and stretch this out and overlock those 3 layers together. So I'm lucky enough to have this cuff attachment here. What I'm going to do is slide this onto my machine. The main thing we have to be aware of is to make sure when we overlock that all 3 of our edges are matched up. Now if you struggle, like that's quite tight, you don't have to use it. And go ahead and repeat that for the cuff on the other side. So now take your collar, and what I want you to do is take it so that the main fabric is like this, and fold it so that we're like this. We need to overlap them. So if you come to this edge here and you come along, you will find a notch. So this notch here is our center front. That there needs to sit exactly on top of the same notch on the other side. So match that like that and come along, and that notch there is the center front as well. So we need to make sure it sits like this, and the reason is because when this is being worn, we need to make sure it's sitting over the top correctly, because it's going to end up like this in our neckline. It's hard to describe anyway. So we need to make sure that this side is on top of this side, and just pin those center fronts into position. What I'll do is, as we go around, I'll just hold those into place there to stop them from moving. Right. So if you have a look, here is our center front. Directly opposite it is 2 notches, which is our center back. So make sure that those 2 notches are sitting on top of each other there. And at the midway point, or not quite midway, there'll be another notch here, and that notch there shows us our shoulder position. So make sure that they're sitting on top of each other as well. And back to the back, and then on this side here is our other shoulder notch there. So the shoulder is not halfway between the front and back, but it's anchored towards the back. So here we are. We have the back, the front, and we have our shoulder points. So now we need to overlock this into the body of our garment. So the best way to overlock this in is to take our garment and turn it so that it is inside out. And we want the neck area at the top. So here's the front and here's the back, and it's wrong side out. So take the neckline, the collar that we've carefully pinned together, and place this inside the garment. And now reorganize all those pins so everything matches. The double notch here needs to match to the double notch at the body there. The notch here for our shoulder matches the shoulder seam. Come to the back, and on the other side there is our other shoulder seam. Now take your time doing this, it can get a little confusing. Then here is all of our layers of the fronts, and that matches to the notch centre way here. There was a gap between the two yoke points, so that needs to match to that position there. Now as we come along the neckline, you'll find a notch here. So that notch there, now I temporarily held those positions in place there. That notch there is the edge of the collar there. And if you come back to the centre front and go to the other side, that will match to the edge of the collar on the other side, the fold. So make sure all of those layers are in the correct position. And take your time doing this. So now you're ready to overlock that collar into place. The best place I find to start from is just before or after one of the shoulder seams, and I always find it easier to sew it so that the collar is on top and the body is underneath, but it's entirely up to you. Now because that seam is quite bulky, make sure you go back and check your work and make sure you haven't missed any areas. If you have, you can either run them over again with the overlocker or go back to your plain stitcher. So next we're going to sew our band onto our garment. So we have two bands that are exactly the same. I mean, if you wanted to, you could have made just one piece, but this way it's nice and easier so we can match our side seams to our garment. So what we're going to do is take our front and back bands, and they're an identical piece, so you'll have two of them, and we're going to match the rectangles together, and we're going to overlock each of the shorter ends. So now we've got one big circle. So now you need to fold it so that the wrong sides are together and the right sides are out. And you'll notice right in the center there's a notch. So that notch represents our centre front and our centre back position, and I'll just pop a pin in it to make it a little bit easier to see. So this is the centre front and centre back, it doesn't matter which one you have, and the seams here are going to match to the side seams of our garment. So take your garment, and it will be right sides out, and come to the hem position. If you come midway, you'll see the notches here to mark our centre front and our centre back. So what I'm going to do is just place the band on the outside, so put the garment in the centre. And I'm going to match the notches here on the band to the notch at the centre front. I'm going to do the same at the centre back. Now at the side seams, we want all of these seams to sit on top of each other. And we want this seam here to match directly on top of the side seam. It may be a little bulky when you overlock through it, so just be careful and take your time. And if we come to the other side seam, now it's a good idea to just face these in opposite directions. You'll find it'll just reduce some of the bulk, and make sure we have that exactly on top of each other. So you will need to slightly stretch this. The band is shorter than the garment it's sewing into. What you need to do is just make sure that these positions are fixed and gently ease out any difference as you go. So I'm just going to start just short of one of my side seams, but it's up to you. You can start wherever you prefer. Make sure you remove those pins as you go. And you need to make sure you catch all of those layers. And depending on the fabric you've chosen, they might be quite thick. So to finish this garment off, I'm now going to put buttons on it. Now I've given you a suggested size and placement for your buttons, but you can certainly adjust this to suit. If you think there's too many, just adjust it. The button placement position I've also marked on the pattern piece. The main thing you have to be aware of is that you evenly space them, and also when they're sewn on, because these are false buttons, these aren't a real button in a buttonhole, we just need to make sure that we go through this front layer and both layers of the placket when we're stitching them, and make sure that the center of the button is centered midway between the fold and the stitch line. So we have to make sure that the button is centered exactly that way and that they're evenly spaced up and down. So go ahead and stitch those on and your garment is complete. Thanks for joining me for this sew along video, and I hope you join me for my next sew along video soon.